Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul, and in this Gamer video, we're going to be discussing and analysing tech news which, as usual, has popped up in the past 24 or so hours. And we're going to start things out with Nvidia, as I have been told that the company are planning to launch a series of Turing GPUs with 16 Gbps memory, which is a considerable uptick in clock speed from the 14 that we currently have. This move may be very similar to what we saw with Pascal, with, let's say, the GTX 1080 when it launched having 10 Gbps memory, which was GDDR5X, and then Nvidia subsequently bumped that to 11 Gbps. So, one thing I don't know is whether the rest of the specifications for the cards would increase. So, for example, would we see higher core clocks? Would we see a bump in the number of CUDA cores? Or would this simply be Nvidia replacing the 14 Gbps memory with 16 Gbps? I wouldn't be surprised, and this is pure speculation on my part, if we also saw possibly the launch of, let's say, the RTX 2070 Ti, which is suspiciously absent right now in Nvidia's lineup, and possibly we might also see a reduction in price. That, by the way, is also pure speculation on my part. But let's face it, if the rumours of Nave are true, and we see a card from AMD, which is, let's say, $350 US dollars, but roughly puts out the same performance as the RTX 2070, I suspect that Nvidia will want to counter this in some way. One of the simple ways they could do that, obviously, is faster memory, because, believe it or not, even the RTX 2070 sometimes, in some applications, in some games, is actually memory bandwidth starved, and this does, of course, even go further with the RTX 2080. So, we have previously heard rumours that we would see a RTX 2080 Ti, or Ti, whatever you want to call it, which actually has 12 gigabytes of GDDR6 memory and also a slightly wider bus width. But obviously that also has not emerged yet, so possibly we may hear about that at Computex. But I think another possibility is Nvidia may decide to reduce the price of the GPUs, but that's just pure speculation. It really does depend on how good Nave is, because one of the consistent themes we've been hearing recently is that Nave is fast, yes, but also rather power hungry and puts out a lot of heat. Then again, if you're looking at, let's just call it $350, and say that there's like a $200 or $300 price difference between it and the closest Nvidia card, I don't think many people are going to be like, well, gee, this card's a bit hot, I don't necessarily want that, I'm just going to go with the Nvidia GPU. People are going to want to save, like, even if it's $100, people are going to quite frequently want to save like $100, but if it's way more than $100, which clearly this is, it may be a bit of a no-brainer, and Nave is probably going to sell well just simply because of that reason. But it's going to be really curious to see what Nvidia are actually planning, and whether Nave does actually live up to the hype. And we did see that leaked PCB, which had those two spaces for 8-pin power connectors. So at least if that PCB really did belong to Nave 10, it is a good indicator that Nave does require an awful lot of energies at the least. We also have a small piece of AMD GPU news, and it kind of concerns Nave, but mostly is a bit of a head scratcher. And this actually was spotted on the Tech Power Up forums. So a user there noticed that there appears to be a rebrand, refresh, whatever you want to call it, of the current 500 series GPUs. That would be the RX 540 and 550, and they appear to be rebranded to the RX 630 and 640. Now, the reason that this is a bit puzzling is because it flies in the face of previous rumours that we'd heard concerning the naming of AMD GPUs for the next generation, which were allegedly going to be known as, let's say, the RX 3080, 3070, and so on. Jim at Adore TV was the one who originally told us that AMD were considering this naming scheme. So there's several possibilities. The first one is that these GPUs are just going to be different naming schemes. Nvidia have done it, after all. We have, let's say, the GTX 1660, and we also have the RTX 60. So that's one possibility. Another possibility is AMD have internally decided to change their naming strategy and keep a more consistent theme to what they currently have. Who knows? Maybe that's also a possibility. Another possibility is it might be because these GPUs are only targeting OEMs. So maybe if that's the case, maybe it was a request by the OEMs to keep these GPUs in that specific naming convention / naming scheme. But obviously, at the end of the day, this is only a guess. So let's move over to some Ryzen 3000 news. The first is actually an update to a video I put out a couple of days ago concerning the clock frequencies for the 12-core Ryzen part, in case you missed it. So aside from the really early engineering sample CPUs such as the 4-core part, which is running at really low clock frequencies, they now have access to two newer parts. One is a 16-core Ryzen CPU, which is running at up to 4.2 gigahertz, and the second part is a 12-core CPU, and this is running at much higher frequencies. I was told that the CPU is up to 5 gigahertz. Now, unsurprisingly, I've also spoken to a couple of more sources, and they have told me that they believe that it's almost certain that that is single-thread performance, which I don't think is too surprising to anyone. I don't think we thought that all of the processor cores were going to be running at up to 5 gigahertz, because that would be absolutely crazy. However, I have been reached out to by another person, and they've told me that from their information, from their contacts, the 12-core part is running at 4550 megahertz. So here's my theory here. It's possible that the 4550 megahertz frequency is an all-core speed. So when all of the processor cores are being taxed to their maximum, we are looking at the CPU running at up to 4550 megahertz. And indeed, it might sound a bit of a really? 4550 megahertz? But don't forget that AMD's CPUs have XFR and precision boost, and it's very fine-grained. So seeing the CPU go up 50 megahertz or down 25 megahertz or what have you is not even slightly uncommon. And obviously it does depend upon workloads, and sometimes a CPU core just for a second has a small dip in the workload, so the CPU frequency will adjust accordingly and blah 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 blah. So I wouldn't be surprised if the all-core frequency for this CPU hits around 4500 megahertz and single thread performance hits around 5 gigahertz. Honestly, at this point, I just really want to know how these CPUs perform. I'm very curious to see what they're capable of in the real world, and this actually ties in to another report that's floating around the internets, and that is concerning memory frequency. So the memory frequency for the original Zen CPU was kind of all over the shop, particularly with early BIOSes. With the early BIOSes, I've said this before, but I actually had an X570 motherboard from Asus, and it literally was not running over 2133 megahertz in some cases. With some memory kits and other memory kits, it was 2400 megahertz. And if I really played around with the BIOS and used a very specific memory kits, then I could get it actually faster than 2400 megahertz, but it was super duper unstable. But later BIOS revisions thankfully did fix this issue, and obviously we've seen drastically improved memory controllers and improved memory compatibility. AMD have been working very hard on this. Indeed, with the news now that we're no longer going to be seeing the B-dies from Samsung, AMD are also reportedly working a lot to improve memory compatibility with the Ryzen 3000 series. But moving back to the memory frequency side of things, in the BIOS options, we will see support for up to DDR4 5000 MHz. Now this is overclocking, this is not officially supported, so your mileage and motherboard choice will drastically affect this. But obviously the DRAM frequency for Ryzen is directly linked to Infinity Fabric, which means that if you're running the memory at DDR4 5000 MHz, Infinity Fabric would also be running at the same frequency. So apparently AMD have also included a half divider mode. So this means that we will be seeing the memory frequency running at half the DRAM actual clock speed. So I've got a question for you. How impatient have you been? How frustrated have you been waiting for Computex? If the answer is pretty darn frustrated, it appears that you're not the only one, because Biostar have either done a deliberate oopsie or an accidental oopsie. Who knows, it's probably a little bit of both, and have actually leaked their X570 motherboard. The motherboard in question is a Biostar Racing GT8, and it has 12 phases for its VRM design, and according to the specification sheet, runs memory up to 4000 MHz, which, as I just mentioned a moment ago, the 5000 figure is definitely a best case scenario. The specification sheet also confirms PCIe 4.0 support, which is actually one of the exclusives that I revealed quite a while ago now, that the X570 chipset would actually be PCIe 4.0. As for connectivity, you've got 3 PCIe slots, you've got 3 PCIe ×1 slots, you've got a DVI connector as well as a HDMI connector. That's obviously if you've got onboard graphics thanks to the APU. You've got M.2 support, 6 SATAs, and blah-de-blah-de-blah. Anyway, I think that's just about it for this particular video. If you've enjoyed it, well, hopefully you click the like button and subscribe to the channel. Also, thanks to everyone who has subscribed recently. I'd like to thank you all for the support. It has been rather overwhelming, actually, but I'd just like to thank everyone for the kind words, the kind emails as well. You can find us on social medias, which of course are linked in the video description. And if you wish to support us on Patreon, or you can buy a pack of chewing gum or something like that from Amazon, then you can find those relevant links also in the video description. Don't feel you have to, but if you want to, then by all means do so. With that said, have an awesome day or evening or whatever time it is for you. Take care of yourselves, and bye for now.